I'm deeply grateful to Tzipi Preil and the officers of Yesod for inviting me to come to speak to all of you. We're just a few nights away from Purim, and I decided that I would talk about a topic that eventually will get to Purim. I want to talk about a certain topic of Achdus, and we'll see how it develops, and eventually we'll come to certain things that you will hear about Purim that you never heard before, and really will change your approach as far as certain parts of the Megillah and also certain parts of the Rosh Hashanah davening, as you will see in a few moments. But first, I would like to start out with a beautiful story, and the story itself is magnificent, but the beauty of the story is the way Rab Chaim Kanievsky understood the story. And when an Adam Gadol understands the story, in America we call it, he put a spin on the story, all of a sudden you have a different attitude towards what is going on in the story and what our Avodas Hashem should be all about. Now, this story happened a number of years ago, 3-4 years ago. There was a fellow, let's call him Nachman, and this guy Nachman had learned in the yeshiva system in America. He went to the kollel for a couple of years, and then he went into business, and he became very, very prosperous. And eventually he moved his family to Eretz Yisroel. Now, every once in a while he would come back to New York to do business, and sometimes he would go down to Miami, and in Miami he had cousins that were Israelis that had done just the opposite of what he did. He had moved from America to Eretz Yisroel. They moved from Eretz Yisroel back to America. Not back to America, but they didn't have an interest in Eretz Yisroel, and they wanted to be in Miami. So they were Nati and Zahava. So when Nachman would go to Nati and Zahava, obviously he couldn't eat in their home, so he would eat either, they would all eat together in a Miami kosher restaurant, or else they would get some takeout food and eat on plastic and paper dishes. And now, a few years ago, when Nachman comes to the house, he looks around, and first of all, he sees that the yarmulke fits on Nati's head very nicely. Now, normally, he knew that every time when he came, obviously Nati put his yarmulke on 5 minutes before, and it sat on his head like a triangle. You've seen these triangular yarmulkes, you know, at the Ke-sher. But over here, the yarmulke seemed to fit comfortably. And not only that, he looked around and he saw that there were mezuzahs on every doorpost. And he even saw a sefer on the table. So he said to him, Nati, has there been a change here in the last couple of years that I don't know about? So he said, boy, you really picked that up pretty fast. He said, yeah, we became Balei Teshuvah, we became religious. He said, well, that's amazing. And he hugged him and he kissed him. He couldn't believe his cousin and his wife had become frum. He said, how did it happen? He said, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. And he said like this. He said, a couple years ago, my wife and I, was a very hot day and in Miami, and my wife and I were sitting on the porch. It was late afternoon, and all of a sudden we see very well-dressed people with shirts and ties and jackets, and some of them were wearing hats, and they're all going down to the water. And I couldn't understand. When you go to the beach in Miami, you don't go in a shirt and a tie. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, oh my heavens, it's Rosh Hashanah. These people are going to Tashlech. He said, I remember Tashlech as a child. I hadn't been in Tashlech in years. And I don't know what possessed me, but I decided that I'm going to take my kippah, I'm going to my house, get my kippah, and I'm going to walk with these people. I would like to see Tashlech. I hadn't seen it in years. So as I'm walking, of course, everybody's looking at me because I look so different than everybody else. And when we come down to the water, everybody takes out their machzorim, and they're reading. And somebody says to me, do you read Hebrew? I said, what do you mean? I'm an Israeli. Of course I read Hebrew. So, and they said, well, would you like to say what everybody's saying? And he said, yeah, I'll say it. And I said the portion that everybody was saying, the little chapter, and I was about to leave. And then somebody came over to me and said, excuse me, did you hear shofar today? So I said, what is shofar? I haven't heard shofar in 7 years. So he said, well, would you like for me to blow shofar for you? I happen to be the Baal Tekeya in the shul. I'm the one who blows shofar, and I happen to have my shofar with me. Now, he didn't remember that at Tashlech you blow shofar. But, you know, if the guy wants to blow shofar, he hadn't heard shofar. So he said, okay, yeah, fine, why not? And the guy takes out a shofar, he had a little shofar, and he starts blowing 30 koilos, and everybody's looking around like, what's Mashiach on the way? Nobody ever heard of Tashlach, and you're blowing shofar. But anyway, he blew shofar, and then again, he was about to leave, and the guy says to him, the one who blew, he says, I just want to tell you who I am. And he's thinking, who cares who you are? We're not friends, we're not going to be friends. He said, my name is Moshe Katz, and I'm the Baltkei of this shul, and I saw where you live. So if you want to have any connection to the synagogue, it's not really so far from where you live. You could always call me. Again, my name is Moshe Katz, I'm the Baltkei here, or else you could go to the rabbi. The rabbi is also near the synagogue. So he thanked him very much, and then he went home. He comes home, and his wife asks him, how is everything? And he tells her everything. They asked me if I could read Hebrew, and I said, of course, I'm an Israeli. And then he said, the strangest thing, this guy Moshe Katz, I never met him before in my life, but he insisted on telling me who he was. And he took out a shofar, and he was blowing shofar for me. And she said, Moshe Katz blew shofar for you? He said, yeah, why? What do you mean? She said, are you sure that was his name? Moshe Katz blew shofar for you? I said, yeah, what are you talking about? She said, my Zaidi, my grandfather, who died many years ago, he lived in Bialystok in Europe. He was the Baltikei. His name was Moshe Katz. He used to blow shofar for his community. I can't believe that all these years later, a guy named Moshe Katz blew shofar for you. My Zaidi was Moshe Katz, and he blew shofar for everybody in his community. Well, both of them, couldn't get over this. What were the chances of something like this happening? So for 2-3 days, they didn't do anything about it. And the more they talked about it, they felt, there's some godly orchestration here. And so they decided they're going to call the rabbi. And they went to the rabbi, and Nati is telling this story, and he says the rabbi was so wonderful and so kind to us that slowly but surely he brought us back to Yiddishkeit. And we became Bali Tshuva, we became religious only because of him. Well, now Nati and Nachman embraced again like he was so happy, and wherever Nachman went, he told the story. Eventually he comes back to Eretz Yisrael, and he says to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who's the Gadol Ador, and he says to him, Rebbe, do you believe this story? Isn't that amazing? And Rabbi Chaim says, these things happen every day. Hashem orchestrates very special things every day. We don't always get to understand what the significance is, but every day wonderful things happen like this. He said, Rebbe, I'd like to ask you a question. Now listen to the question, because the question is great and the answer is even greater. He said, Rebbe, I would like to ask you, if Hashem wanted my relatives to become religious, why didn't he send them Moshe Katz 10 years ago? Good question, right? If Hashem wanted that these people should become religious, why didn't he orchestrate it that it should happen before? And Rab Chaim gave a very interesting teretz, a very interesting answer. He said Hashem waits for somebody to take the first step. And when somebody takes the first step, then Hashem puts things into action. As soon as this guy went in to get his kippah, and he put it on his head, and he went to Tashlach, Hashem said, now I can send you Moshe Katz. And when I heard this story, I was so touched by it, because there's a medrash at the end of Eicha. And the medrash at the end of Eicha tells us that Kaviyachol means so to speak. Hashem has a machlokes with Klal Yisrael, an argument. Hashem says, as the pasuk tells us, Shuvu Elai va'ashuva aleichem. That's in Malachi Gimel pasuk Zayin. Hashem says, you return to me, you take the first step, and then I'll return to you. You show me that you care. You learn a little bit more. You daven a little bit slower. Do a little bit more chesed. Show that you have Ahavas Yisroel. Do something that shows me that you care. Shuvu elai, return to me. And then v'ashuva aleichem, I'll return to you. But what do we say to Hashem? We say, Hashem, you take the first step. Not us, you. Hashivenu Hashem elecha. Hashem, return to us. Then v'nashuva, we're going to come back to you. In other words, we're all waiting for a sign. We say to Hashem, God, show us a sign that you're there. And Hashem says, that's not really how it's supposed to be. Shuvu elai, you show me a sign. You show me that you care. V'ashuv aleichem, and I'll come back to you. Now, if you're not too tired tonight, before you go to sleep, take out an Eicha, and you will see an amazing thing. Next to the last pasuk in Eicha is a very, very famous pasuk. But there's a letter missing in the last word of the pasuk. The pasuk is Hashiveinu Hashem Elecha. That's the pasuk that we were just saying. That we're saying to Hashem, you return to us, V'nashuva. The hey is missing in V'nashuva. The reason that we can read it V'nashuva is because it's Kometz Veis Va. So it's V'nashuva, but the hey is not there. Now, when you look in your Megillah, or Megillas Esther, your Sefer, you will see that there's a Kri and a Ksiv. A Ksiv means this is how it's written. It's written without the hey. We read it as if it has a Veis and a hey. Where's the hay? What happened to the hay? Where did it go? I'll show you where the hay is. It's right here. I found it. Okay? And I want to show you why I want to tell you why I'm showing you the hay. Because the Gemara in Menachos says an amazing thing. It says that the world was created like a hay. What does that mean? That if Chas v'Shalom, a person does Averis, a person could fall so low, there's no end to the bottomless pit that a person could fall when they do Averis. But no matter what a person did, no matter where a person went, no matter what they watched, no matter what they said, this door is open for Teshuvah. The letter Hey represents Teshuvah. That's why we know Hey is equal number 5, right? And the 5th bracha in Shemoneh Esrei, what's the 5th bracha? Hashivenu Hashem, right? Bring us back to Teshuvah. And the Torah says Hashivenu begins with a Hey and it ends with a Hey. So, beginning and ends with a Hey, 5 and 5 is 10, that's Taseres Yomei Teshuvah. That's why the Hey is missing in V'nashuva. Because if we wait, then Hashem should take the first step and show us a sign, then we come back. So that's Teshuvah, but that's not the ideal Teshuvah. The ideal Teshuvah is Shuva Oilai. We should take the first step. So the question is, what is the first step? What is the proper thing that we should be doing, especially when we come here before Purim and we want to become close to Hashem? So I want to tell you an amazing thing. I have a Rebbe, his name is Rabbi Krohn. He's a genius. He's a tremendous Talmud Chacham. And he said something that is so brilliant on the Megillah. You could use this at the Purim Suda. Tell this over, because people will have to see it inside. They won't believe it. Now, all of us know that before the Yidden got the Torah tells us that Vayichan Sham Yisroel, right? The Jewish people rested there. Where did they rest? By Har Sinai. Now, really it should have said Vayachanu, they rested. Who knows? Why does it say Vayichan? Of all the 500 people that are here, who could guess? Does anybody know what Rashi says? Right, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, right? 1 out of 500, that's not bad. Okay? So, really 700. Okay, but the point is that Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, in other words, it had to be with unity. That's why it's Lashon Yochid. So now my Rebbe, Rabbi Krohn, asked a wonderful question. And again, when a Talmud Chacham asks a question and the answer is even better than the question, that's amazing. Now, the Gemara tells us, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. The Gemara in Shabbos says that at the end of the Megillah, it tells us, in Perik Tes, Pasuk Chav Zayin, and you got to look it up. When you say it at the table, you got to look it up because nobody's going to believe you. And then you'll be able to show it to everyone. Perik Tes, Pasuk Tes Zayin, it says, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. Kibu means that they observed, v'kiblu, and they accepted. So the Gemara says, Kimu masha kiblu kvar. They were Makayim, the Torah, which they accepted once again. In other words, there was a new acceptance of Torah. So my Rebbe Rabbi Krohn asked, if at Har Sinai it said Vayichan, and as you said, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad, where do we find over here by Purim that there was Achdos? If they were Makabel the Torah a new time, a second commitment, where do we see that there was unity as one? And you have to look inside because you won't believe it. We read it, Kimu v'kiblu. But now one of you 700 people, do you know what it really says in the Megillah? It doesn't say Kimu v'kiblu. It says Kibel. We read it Kiblu. But it really says Kuf Beis Lamed, right? It says Kibel Lashon Yochid. Okay? And that's what it is. It was Lashon Yochid, just like Vayichan as Lashon Yochid, Ki ish echad b'leiv echad. They were makabel as one because they were in unison. We read it Kiblu because we have a shuruk, the U sound, underneath the lamed. So it's Kiblu. But really, it says kibel. Again, a sign of achdus. So if that's the case, if there is achdus, now the question is, what can we do to become people of achdus? And I'll tell you something adorable that my son, today, Baruch Hashem, he's already with a family, but when he was a little boy, he said this word that's amazing. Umishloyach monois ish l'reyehu. How much is ish equal to? Who can figure out in gematria? Does anybody know? Ish, aleph is how much? 1, yud is 10, and shin is 300. So how much is that? 311. L'reyehu is also equal, 311. So what would you learn from that? Ish and l'reyehu is the same. Right? You got to love your friend just like yourself. You're an ish, okay, you're an isha, but generally ish is a person, right? So ish is equal to reyehu. In other words, again, a sign of achdus. So if we wanted to become a people of achdus, I want to show you something amazing. You know, you're not supposed to count Jews. If we wanted to count everybody here, you just can't go around starting counting. So what they did in the time of the Torah, they gave a machzas a shekel, and everybody counted. They counted the shekalim. And the way the pasuk tells us says v'nosnu. V'nosnu means and they shall give. Look at this word. Who notices something unusual about this word? V'nosnu. Palindrome. Excellent, right? Palindrome. Okay? You can read it forwards and backwards. Like mom, pop, race car, radar. My daughter Aviva, A-V-I-V-A, right? All these words. So now the Baal HaTurim tells us something fabulous. Why is V'nosnu a palindrome? What do we learn from that? And listen to what he says. It's absolutely amazing. And he says like this. Im tikra'ena lamafreya. If you read the word backwards, it's also V'nosnu. Loy malach, to teach you. Masha odam neisin l'tzedakah. That which you give to tzedakah. And I believe it is extend when you give of your heart and you give of your time and you give of your encouragement and your chizuk, it's going to come back to you. You're not going to be missing anything because of that. In other words, when you give to somebody else, you're going to get back. Now, no matter what level of life you are in today, many times a person is riding high and they think, well, I don't have to do anything for everybody, I'm okay. No, life is a cycle. There are ups and downs in life. And sometimes we do something for somebody and we think that we're only giving, but really, eventually we get back. That's what V'nosnu is all about. Now, most of you probably live in Kew Gardens Hills, right? So I just want to tell you a great V'nosnu story that's going on right now. And it's about somebody that some of you know. Does anybody know Rabbi Yehuda Zakatinsky? Well, if you don't know him, you should get to know him. He's a big tzaddik. And he has a wonderful organization besides Yesod. He has a wonderful organization called Hashivenu. Now, Hashivenu was created by Rabbi Zakatinsky and his friends because there are not hundreds but thousands of young men and young women like yourselves that go to Eretz Yisrael and become so inspired. And then when they come back, they don't have a network that other people have. Because now they're on a much higher level than they were when they left. So who's going to give them shiurim? Who's going to get them shidduchim? Who's going to get them, jobs? And that's what the job of Hashivenu is. That's the organization of Hashivenu. It's a great organization. And he works with college kids. He's just wonderful. So he told me an amazing story. A few months ago, he got a call from a Rosh Yeshiva. Now, I can't say the name of the Rosh Yeshiva, and of course he wouldn't tell me the name, but even if I did know the name, I wouldn't be able to say it, as you'll see in a second. And the Rosh Yeshiva says to him, Rabbi Zakatinsky, I need a favor. Could you please, I know you work with college kids, could you please go to this and this college here in New York and work with my son, learn with him, because he's off the derech, he's not religious anymore, and I don't have any communication with him. He just tunes me out totally. So maybe you could go and maybe you could talk to him and learn with him. And Rabbi Zakatinsky says, Rosh Yeshiva, of course I'll go. Just tell me his name and tell me what college he's in and I'll do it. And the Rosh Yeshiva thanks him so much. And Rabbi Zakatinsky says, You want to know? If you have a minute, I'll tell you a story why I never say no to anyone when they ask me to learn with them. He says, yeah, tell me. He says, I want to tell you a story that happened to me when I was 13 years old. He said, I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. And shortly after my bar mitzvah, my father sent me to a yeshiva that had a high school and had a beis medrash. And the level of the learning in that school was much higher than what I was used to in New Haven. And after a few weeks, even though I was just starting high school, but that level of learning was much higher than what I was used to. So I was falling behind. So one Shabbos I come into the beis medrash, and there are a bunch of older guys learning, and I go over to one of them and I said, could you please learn with me? I'm falling behind in my studies, and I really want to catch up. Is there any way you could help me? And the guy said, I'm so sorry, I have a chavrusa that's a study partner, and we learn a different Gemara on Shabbos, and we're really trying to accomplish a lot, so we're trying to finish another Gemara, so I'm sorry, maybe you could get somebody else. So he said, I went to a second guy, and the second guy said, you know, it's Shabbos today, and Shabbos I like to learn Mishnah Berurah, I like to learn Halacha, so, and I'm really, you know, and I really have to accomplish a lot, so maybe you could get somebody else. He said, I was so humiliated. You know, I was a little kid. I didn't know these people. I had to go over, ask a stranger. And then I went to a third guy and a fourth guy. Everybody had a different excuse. And before I went over to the fifth guy, I said to myself, if this guy doesn't learn with me, Sunday morning I'm leaving the yeshiva. I'm out of here. I went over to the fifth guy, and I told him the same thing, that I'm falling behind. He stood up, he put his arm around me, and he said, of course, sit down, let's learn together. What would you like to learn? And we learned for 40 minutes, and it was absolutely beautiful. And not only that, the next week he came over to me, and he said, remember last week we learned so nicely, would you like to learn again? Can I help you? And when that guy said that to me, I swore to myself for the rest of my life, if anybody ever asks me to learn with them, I will never say no. And we learned another 40 minutes, and it was wonderful. And he says to the Rosh Yeshiva, you know who that fellow was who learned with me? He said, that was you. He said, me? He said, didn't you go to that yeshiva? He said, yeah. He said, you know why you don't remember? Because you were kind to everybody. So now look at this. 30 years ago, the boy, who was probably 19 years old, right? He was an older boy in a beis medrash, 1920, helped this little bar mitzvah boy, who was 13, and he helped him with his studies. And now, all the years later, this bar mitzvah boy, who's now a grown man, is going to help the Rosh Yeshiva's son. Hopefully, now all of you know it's a long process, it doesn't happen overnight. But that's what V'nosnu is all about. That's what V'nosnu is all about. Never ever hesitate to give to others, because it's the greatest investment in yourself. It's not only an investment for others, but when you give to others, whether it's money, whether it's heart, whether it's chizuk, whether it's your talent, Hashem keeps a scorecard. And someday you're going to get it back from somebody else when you need it. Now, I want to tell you an amazing thing. I would hope that someday we would all be able to go on this trip that I'm about to tell you about. Now, over the last number of years, ever since 2003, I've had the great zchus of taking people to many different places where Yiddishkeit flourished. One year we went to Poland, another year we went to Frankfurt, Prague, and Vienna, another year Lithuania, another year Spain. This year either we'll go to Hungary or Italy, whatever. We've done many of these trips. They're fabulous, and they're really life-changing. Now, a couple years ago we went to Spain and Gibraltar, and it was just absolutely incredible. It was Morocco, Spain, and Gibraltar. And what happened was we had with us a wonderful teacher. Some of you have been to Eretz Yisrael, may have heard of him. His name is Rabbi Menachem Nissel. He's from England, very funny, big Talmud Chacham, and a wonderful teacher, as you know. So he spoke, and he said an amazing thing. He said that when the Jews were expelled from Spain, there were many Jews who hid, and they acted as Goyim publicly, but privately they acted as Jews. Now, there's a word for those people, and it's a word that we shouldn't use. I'm going to tell you the word because I never want you to use it, and I'll tell you the right word. Most people call those people Moranos. Now, marrano, if you look it up in the Spanish dictionary, means pig. So that's a terrible thing to call a Jewish person. Now, of course, the Spaniards, they hated the Jews, so they called them pigs. But really, we should never call them that. The real word to call them is conversos. Converso means somebody who seems to have converted, right? Like these people, they seem to convert to Christianity, but at night and privately, and Friday night, you know, they lit candles and they observed Yiddishkeit as best as they could in private. Now, every single one of us here, everyone in the world needs a hero. You need somebody that you look up to, somebody who's like a guiding light. So who would you say was the hero of the conversos? Who was the greatest converso that ever lived? What? The Barbanel? Okay, close. He was over there, but somebody that's a Purim hero. Esther, right? Esther Amalka was the greatest converso. Here she's in the Persian kingdom, in the Persian castle, together with the king, acting in public. Nobody knows who she is, right? As the Pasuk tells us. The Pasuk tells us that Lo higida Esther as ama v'es moiladata, right? Esther doesn't say her birthplace or what country she's from or what nation she's from, because Mordechai told her not to tell, okay? And for those of you taking notes, it's the Megillas Esther Beis, Pasuk Yod. So she was a converso, and those people looked up to her as a hero. Now, then Rabbi Nissel told us something that was out of this world. And you will never, ever daven again Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in the same way after you hear this. And you're going to see something that's, you got to really fasten your seatbelts. It's amazing. The Avudraham asks a question. In Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davening, every single Shemona Esrei, there's one word that we keep on saying over and over and over and over again. And the word almost seems to have almost no meaning and no reason for being there. And that word is uvachein. Now, for example, you remember uvachein tein pachtacha, uvachein tzadikim, uvachein yiskadesh, uvachein tein koved. What does uvachein mean? Uvachein means, and in this manner. So even if you left out the word uvachein, you could still read it. Yiskadesh shimcha Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael Amecha. Make your name holy. Hashem, make your name holy. Or tein pachtacha Hashem Elokeinu Al Kol Masecha. Give your fear and awe over all creation. Why does it have to say uvachein and in this manner? What is uvachein teaching us? What does it add? And the Avudraham says something out of this world. And it says like this. What happens in the Megillah? Mordechai tells Esther, I want you to go in to the king, and now you got to tell him that you're Jewish. Because Haman is trying to kill the Jews. You must reveal who you really are. And she says, no, I can't go into the king. As the Pasuk tells us in Esther Dalet Pasuk Yud Aleph, Kol Avdi HaMelech V'Am, everybody knows, Yodim Asher Kol Ish V'Isha, any man or woman who comes to the king, and without permission, he could get killed. What, do you tell me to go to the king and tell him that I'm a Jew, and now I'm going to go in without permission? He'll kill me. So Mordechai says, you got no choice. You must save the Jewish people. Now's the time for you to make that sacrifice. You got to go in. So listen to what she says. Listen carefully, because you're never going to forget this. She says, Lech kenoises kol Yehudim, gather all the Jews together that are found in Shushan. V'tzumu alai, and you guys should fast and don't eat and drink for 3 days. Gam ani v'neroisai otzum kain. Me and my maidservants, we're going to do the same thing. And watch the next word. Does anybody know what the next word is? Uvachein. She says the word uvachein. Uvachein, and in this manner, Ovai El HaMelech, I'm going to come to the king. Oh, now the Avudraham says something brilliant. Every time when it says the word HaMelech in the Megillah, it can also be a reference to Hashem. So what's happening Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah? We are afraid to go to the king. Many of us, when we daven Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we're thinking, oh my gosh, everything that I did in the past year, how am I going to appear in front of Hashem? We're afraid to go to the king. But what happens? What happened when Esther went to the king? What did the king tell her? My dear queen, ad chatzi malchus, whatever you want, I'm ready to give it to you. In other words, she went into the king even though she was afraid, and she got what she wanted. She got everything. That's why we say uvachein so many times. Tonight, again, if you're not too tired, after you look up the last pasuk in Eicha, next to the last pasuk, take out your Rosh Hashanah machzor, as I did on my Yom Kippur. I underlined every uvachein, because that uvachein on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is Esther's uvachein. Uvachein ovay al melech, and that way I'm going to come to the king. Okay? That's why we say uvachein on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, because she was afraid to go into the king, but she got answered. And that's what we want on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, that we should be answered, even though we're afraid to go into the king. Now watch this. You can go crazy from this, but please don't. You know, some of you may know, that the Arizal says, what is Yom Kippur called? Yom Kippurim. Now, if I asked you, what are the two most opposite days in all the festivals of Klal Yisrael throughout the year? You would surely say Purim is like wild, happy, dressed up, drinking, eating, right? And Yom Kippur is just the opposite. Serious, davening, dressed in white. What do you mean, Yom Kippurim? What does that mean? The Arizal says that's why it's called Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim. What does that mean? And you know what the answer is? I heard this from Rabbi Eitan Feiner. Based on this, it's brilliant. What happened on Purim? We were afraid to go into the king. Esther was afraid to go into the king, but she got answered. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. Yom Kippurim, we want it to be like a day like Purim. Just like on Purim, she was afraid to go to the king and she got answered. On Yom Kippur, we're afraid to go to the king and we're going to be answered. That's the confidence that a Yid has on Yom Kippurim. Because just like Hashem answered Esther on Purim, that we should get answered on Yom Kippur as well. And that's what Purim is all about. And I want to beg all of you, and without exaggeration, this film that is being made tonight, that's going to be seen by Torah Anytime and Hidabrut and all the other wonderful organizations, by tomorrow afternoon, this will be around the world. This is no joke. It's going to be in Australia, in Chile, in Mexico, in Switzerland, England, Canada, Israel. I know, because all these places that I go to, they tell me that they all see TorahAnytime.com. So not only am I begging all of you here tonight, but I'm begging all of you that are listening, don't waste Purim. Purim is a day of tefillah. All of us here, everybody wants to get married. Everybody wants to build a family. Everybody wants to be, in a way, v'nahapachu, different than what we are right now. Right now we're in a certain status in life, but we want to be different. V'nahapachu. We want it to be different. Purim is the time to daven for all these things. Make sure that you daven carefully on Purim. And it's not only drinking and eating and giving shalach manas, but it's tefillah. You got to take away time from everything else and just daven, cry to Hashem. Because that's what happened with Esther. On Purim, they were answered. They had the Yeshua. Because it was with tefillah and it was with sincerity. And that's what Purim is all about. That's why it's Yom Kippurim. Of course it's a day of festivity, and we hope everybody has a wonderful Suda to go to, and everybody will sing and dance and be happy on Purim. Of course that. But let's not squander this great opportunity of tefillah. Daven Shemoneh Esrei in a siddur. Daven, whatever you're going to daven. Daven it slow, daven it carefully. You can talk in English to Hashem in different places in the Shemoneh Esrei. Make it a holy day of tefillah. Because if Yom Kippur is like Purim, so you can imagine what Purim is all about. That we want Yom Kippur to be that. Now, I want to tell you something amazing. We talk about achdos, we talk about giving, we talk about friendship. So I want to tell you an amazing story. Now this story, I heard it a couple years ago, and Mitzvah Hashem, I'm coming out with another book, another Maggid book of stories around Hanukkah time. I still need 20 stories to go, so if anybody's got any good stories, I'll help make you famous. Just give me that good story, I'll be happy to write it. But, so this lady from Toronto calls me up, Chaya Levinson, and she says, Rabbi Krohn, I got a great story for you. I said, listen to me. I'm writing another Maggid book. It's just about finished. Do me a favor, call me in 2 months. This book will be out. I'll put it in the next book. She says, no, Rabbi, you got to listen to the story. You're going to put it in this book. I said, why does it have to be in this book? She said, because it's a great story. It's got to go in. She said, just give me 5 minutes. That's all. That's all I want, 5 minutes. And I'll tell you the story, then you judge. Of course she was right and I was wrong. It's a fabulous story. You're not going to believe it. But I spoke to the people involved, including Chaya Levinson. So Chaya Levinson tells me like this. She's been living in Toronto a number of years, and in 2006, she realized that she was having kidney failure and she needed a kidney transplant. She had to get a kidney. And she didn't know what to do because otherwise she was going to be in dialysis. Only 17% of her kidney was functioning. So it was very serious. So she went to her rabbi, Rabbi Lowy from the Ahavas Yisroel of Toronto, and he said, don't take any advertisements in the papers, but wherever you go, tell people that you need a kidney. You go to a PTA meeting, you go to shul, you go shopping, anybody that you're talking to, get the word out. So that's what she did. And sure enough, a donor came forward, but unfortunately, he was a match, but he wasn't healthy enough. And the donor has to be in perfect health in order to be able to give over the kidney. So weeks and weeks were going by, and it was terrible. She couldn't get a donor no matter where she spoke to and who she mentioned it to. And she was becoming very sad and very depressed. And then one Saturday night, her husband, Yehuda, said to her, you know, I got to go to give a shiur on the other side of town. Why don't you come with me? I'm giving a shiur in Lakutei Moharan. And she said, no, I really don't feel like going. I'm just not in the mood. He said, just the opposite. Because you're not in the mood and because you're so, feeling down upon yourself, why don't you just get out? You stop thinking about yourself. She said, all right, fine. Now, the woman that was hosting this event where the shiur was, there was going to be men and women there, was a woman who had just moved from Chicago. Her name was Mindy Halper. And Mindy hosted this thing, and there were men and women there, a whole group of men and women from that neighborhood. And Yehuda Levinson gave the shiur. He gives the shiur, and after he finishes the shiur, they sat down to have Lav Malka. The men were sitting here, the women were sitting there. It was very nice. And then all of a sudden, Chaya Levinson reminds herself, oh, you know what? Rabbi Lowy said, wherever I go, I gotta, tell people. So she's sitting around the table. She says, ladies, I just want to tell you that I need a kidney. So from the other end of the table, Mindy Halper says, you need a kidney? I'll give you one. Like French fries. You got French fries or ketchup? I'll give you one. She said, what, are you serious? She said, yeah, I got 2 of them. You can function with one. I'll be happy to give you one. Like, she couldn't believe it. So nonchalant about this. And they get into this whole conversation, and wouldn't you know, Monday morning, Mindy Halper and Chaya Levinson go to Toronto General Hospital, and she is a perfect match. And not only is she a perfect match, she's in perfect health. And she gives her the kidney, and they arrange it, and it's Shalom Al Yisrael. It's unbelievable. And everything is fine. Chaya is doing well, and Mindy's doing well. Fine. A few weeks after the operation, Mindy calls Chaya Levinson and says, remember I told you I'm from Chicago. I'm trying to get immigration papers. I want to become a Canadian citizen. And your husband is an immigration lawyer. You think he could help me? What? I think I can help you? I'll do anything. You save my life. Of course my husband will do anything what you want. So they contact, Yehuda Levinson is in contact with Mindy Halper, and he gets her all the papers, and he's getting all the laws. He knows all the laws, to do it quickly and everything like that. And finally, it's the last things, that he has to get for her. And he says to her, Mrs. Halper, I just want to tell you that you've got to get a bill of perfect health, because in a new country for you, in Canada, they don't want to give citizenship to somebody that has any communicable diseases. So we've got to check you out, and I'm sure that you're okay, but we've got to check you out, and you've got to go to a doctor. She says, what do you mean? I gave your wife a kidney just a few weeks ago. I'm in perfect health. She said, look, Canadian immigration has certain doctors that they certify, and you must go to a certain doctor that's on their list. I'm sure that you're perfectly healthy, and then we'll get you the papers and the citizenship papers. Fine. She comes to this woman doctor who Yehuda Levinson had recommended, and they take x-rays, and the doctor, a woman, she calls in Mindy Halper, and she says, I can't tell you the results of the x-ray. You got to come tomorrow with your husband. No, that's never good, right? That doesn't sound good. So she's frightened out of her mind. And the next morning she comes with her husband, and the doctor says, I want to show you something. And she puts up the x-ray, and she shows both of them, a tiny black spot on the lung. And she says, I believe that's the beginning of cancer, but we've caught it so early that we could take it out and you wouldn't even need any radiation or any chemo. And they had it checked out, it really was cancerous. And they took it out. She did not need radiation, she did not need chemotherapy, and her life was saved. She thought she was saving Chaya Levinson's life because she gave her a kidney. And it turned out because she gave her a kidney, she got in contact with her husband, who was the immigration lawyer, who got her in contact with the doctor who saved her life because she caught that cancerous thing. Now, of course, I printed that story in the book, and that Elul, I was in Toronto before Rosh Hashanah, and I asked both of them to please come. There was 1,000 people in the audience, and I told everybody the story. And when I finished the story, I said, I just want you to know that right here in the second row is Chaya Levinson sitting right next to Mindy Halper. And they stood up, and everybody stood up and gave them such a standing ovation. I was sitting there crying. It was so unbelievable. But that's what Achdus is all about. And that's what V'nosnu is all about. When you give, no matter what you give, eventually it's going to come back to you. Not necessarily the same thing, but in a different manner. That's what Achdus and that's what V'nosnu is all about. So I want to tell you one more thing, which I think is absolutely incredible. You know, most of you, although many who will be watching this video, are old enough to remember Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, unfortunately, was one of the greatest fiascos that America ever had. America lost tens of thousands of soldiers in Vietnam. But in Vietnam, when the Americans fought, they had a Navy warship, and it was named the Kitty Hawk. It's a long, long warship. You could look it up. And jets would fly off the Kitty Hawk. And there was a certain fellow, his name was Captain Plumb, P-L-U-M-B. He was the best jet fighter pilot, and he flew the most sophisticated planes, the F-4. And every day he flew off the Kitty Hawk, and he would bomb out enemy territories, and he flew 74 missions. Each of those missions is called a sortie. He had one mission left to fly, number 75, and then he was going to finish his tour of duty with the Navy, and he was going to come back to America. The 75th mission was shot down by enemy planes. The plane exploded. He was propelled from the plane, but he was wearing a parachute. The parachute opened up, and it saved his life, but he fell in enemy territory. And unfortunately, he was in prison for 5 long years. 5 long years, and he was tortured just about every day because they were convinced that he knew military secrets. After 5 years, the war was over. He was sent back to America, and he went into rehabilitation, and he became a public speaker. And wherever he went, he told his story of himself on the Kitty Hawk and how his life was saved. One night, he was in Kansas City. And when he was in Kansas City, he went to a restaurant afterwards to eat quietly. And suddenly, he notices that somebody is staring at him. Now, when you're alone in a place that you're not used to and not familiar with, and somebody is staring at you, it's very uncomfortable. So he looks back at his food, and he looks out at this guy, and the guy is still staring at him. Then finally, the guy who's staring comes over to me and says, "Excuse me, are you Captain Plum?" He says, "Yes, sir." "How do you know that?" He says, "You were on the Kitty Hawk, and you flew 74 missions. Is that not correct?" He said, "Yes, sir." "But how do you know that?" He said, "And the 75th mission was shot down, and the parachute saved your life. Is that not true?" And now Captain Plum stands up. He says, "You are so right, but how do you know this, sir?" And the guy says, "Because I was a sailor on the Kitty Hawk, and I packed your parachute." Well, he could not believe it. "You packed my parachute?" He said, do you know how much I have prayed for you and your family, and I didn't even know who you were? And you were the one who packed my parachute? I don't even know what to say. He said, well, looks like the parachute worked, didn't it? And they got into this wonderful conversation. And of course, they saw that this guy, they were both on the same Kitty Hawk. And he was really the one who packed his parachute. And they get into this whole conversation. They're reminiscing about the war. And finally, the guy who was the sailor, of course, now he was in civilian life, he left the restaurant. And Captain Plum says he was sitting alone and he felt awful. He says, I'll tell you why I felt awful. He said, I bet that I saw that sailor 100 times on the Kitty Hawk. Not once did I ever say hello to him. Not once did I ever thank him. You know what? Because I was a jet fighter pilot. He was only a sailor. But he packed my parachute. And if he packed my parachute, I owed him thank you. I owed him courtesy. And he said there are a lot of people out there who pack our parachutes and we never thank them. He said, when was the last time you thanked your parents? When was the last time you thanked your teachers or your principals or your Mora or your rabbi? Or your friend who was there for you when you needed them most? There are people out there who pack our parachutes and we don't even think about it. He said that's why he felt depressed. Because he really owed thanks to so many people, especially this sailor, and he never did it. And that's a great lesson. That's a great lesson of giving. That's a great lesson of achdus. Achdus means not only when you actually do something for somebody, but even to acknowledge and to say thank you. Right? How many people went over tonight to Miss Prael to thank her for this shiur, right? She made so many calls, she got so involved, she runs this organization, and everybody takes it for granted. We owe her a big thanks. But I was wondering, is there a Torah perspective? Is there a Torah source for thanking somebody who packs your parachutes? And I'll tell you an amazing thing. When I was 15 years old, I was studying in Yeshiva Torah Das, and my father would go to a shiur. My father would go to a shiur that was given by Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. And this shiur was given from many rabbis. Many rabbis would come to Manhattan, and Rabbi Soloveitchik would give the shiur. And what happened was he would learn a Gemara, and then he would speak about the Parsha. And my father wanted that I should hear how this Rabbi Soloveitchik was a genius, how he gave the shiur. So I'm listening to the shiur, Masechta Megillah, and then he spoke on the Parsha. Now if I live to be 160, I will never forget what he said that night on Parshas Vayishlach. And you could look it up, you could write down what pasuk it's in, Bereshis Lamed Hey, pasuk Ches and Tes. And it tells us like this. Vatomas Devoira Meinekes Rivka. Devoira, the nursemaid of Rivka, dies, and Yaakov gives a hesped, that means he gives a eulogy on Devorah, and the place is called Alon Bachus, the plain of crying. And then the pasuk tells us, after that hesped, and after Yaakov called it Alon Bachus, then it says, Vayera Elokim al Yaakov od, Hashem came once again to Yaakov. What is going on here? Asked Rabbi Yoshe Ber. Who is Devorah? Why is Yaakov crying about her? And why is Hashem coming back to visit Yaakov a second time? And he said something amazing. And for years I didn't repeat this because I didn't know how to check this out biologically and scientifically until I realized that I have a friend, Danny Center, who I didn't know raises bees. I've seen his hives. He has over 100,000 bees. It's unbelievable. He has in Teaneck and he has upstate New York. It's incredible. The reason I tell you this is because this is what Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik said. The word Devorah, you know what Devorah means? A bee. Devorah in Hebrew means a bee. And Rabbi Yoshe Ber said that's the worker bee. Now, the worker bee, what it does is it flies over certain flowers. And it never lands on a flower unless it knows it can draw nectar from that flower. And when it draws nectar from that flower, it takes the nectar, brings it back to the hive, and all the other bees work on it. In other words, this Devorah, this bee, knows which flowers. It has a sense where it could draw from. So said Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. He said that Devorah was raised in the house of Lavan and Besuel. One was a bigger liar, one was a bigger cheater, one was a bigger faker than the other. But she knew I could land on Rivka. This is the girl that I can develop, this little tzaddikis. I could develop. And that's what the pasuk tells us. Vatomas Devorah meinekes Rivka. Yaakov realized that Devorah was the one who packed his mother's parachute. She's the one who made us special. And that's why the Ramban says that when Devorah got older, Yaakov said to her, come with us, we're leaving Lavan, come with us, we'll take care of you the rest of your days. That's why Devorah was with Yaakov and his family when she died, because they were taking care of her. And that's why he gave her the hesped, because he realized not only that Devorah packed his mother's parachute, but Rivka packed Yaakov's parachute, because it was Rivka who believed in Yaakov, not Yitzchak. And when Hashem saw that Yaakov has hakaras hatov, and he's grateful to those who packed his parachute and packed his mother's parachute, then the pasuk tells us, Vayera Elikim al Yaakov od, that Hashem came back to Yaakov a second time. And that's what hakaras hatov is all about. That's what it means when a person is a giver. Not only a giver in such a way that you actually give something, but even to give recognition, that's also giving. And that's one of the most important things in human relationships. To say thank you, to give gratitude for somebody who does anything. Whether it's the guy who's laying in shul, or the mailman, or the one who bakes challah in the bakery, anybody. Always say thank you, that it's such a beautiful thing. You know, I'm a very big believer in saying thank you. And so many times, when I say thank you to somebody who has done something that has affected many people, not only when they do it for me, but they do something for the klal, and I'll call them or write them a note. Somebody just told me they retired, I can't say where from, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but she's a fabulous editor from a newspaper. And I've written for that newspaper numerous times. She's a great editor. And for whatever reason, she decided she's going to spend more time now with her grandchildren, and she just officially retired. And she sent out, she told me, I think she sent out more than 50 letters to people to let them know that she's retiring as the editor. Of course, I called her right away. And when I met her at a bris last week, she told me, out of the 50 letters that I sent, 3 people called to say that they're going to miss me, and you were one of them. 3 people called to say thank you. She sent 50 letters to everybody. She sent these 50 emails, right? But is that nice? Somebody does something for you, always say thank you. That's part of human relationships. As a matter of fact, I always love to tell this story. You know, I love to travel. I travel many places. One of the places that I love to go to is in Canada, especially Toronto. And so here in LaGuardia Airport, I was once traveling. I'm waiting to get on the plane. Everybody's standing around, you know, just waiting until they announce boarding. And all of a sudden, 2 security guards come to our gate. And it's very uncomfortable when 2 security guards are coming. They look very serious. You don't know what in the world is going on. Is there a terrorist here that they're looking for? And they come over to me. And, you know, like I stand up. I say, excuse me, gentlemen, can I help you? And the guy takes out a cell phone. He says, is this your cell phone? I said, of course not. You know, I have mine in my pocket. I said, oy vey, it's not in my right pocket here, not my left, not my shirt, not my jacket. I said, officer, that is my cell phone. Where did you get my cell phone? He said, I don't know where you're traveling, but you know, you had so many bins going through security that, you know, you had 5 bins of stuff and you only picked up 4, and the 5th one was your cell phone. I said, officer, I can't thank you enough. You know how many numbers I have in my contacts? I would have to retype the whole thing. So I thanked him, and as he was about to leave, I don't know what possessed me to ask him this. I said to him, excuse me, sir, gentlemen, how'd you recognize me? There's 2,000 people in this terminal here in LaGuardia, in Air Canada. And he said, I thought he was going to say, because you're the only guy wearing a black hat. That's what I thought he was going to say. But that's not what he said. He said, do you remember what you said to us when you went through security? I said, no. He said, You looked at both of us and you said, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I feel safer that you're here. He said, thousands of people go by every day, security. Nobody says thank you. You said thank you. We were going to find you if you were the last guy in the terminal. Okay, so besides the Kiddush Hashem, don't they deserve thank you? Would you like to have a job like they have, smell 5,000 pairs of socks a day? Everybody's taking off their shoes, right? What kind of job is that? But anyway, so wherever I go, I tell this story. Now, you will not believe what happened last year. Last year, a guy comes over to me and says, Rabbi Krohn, you're not going to believe this. I was in Kennedy Airport, and I was going through the Air Canada terminal, and I remembered your story. So I said to the security guard, thank you for being here. So the security guard says, oh, you heard the rabbi tell the story? Why shouldn't we say thank you? So I just want to end with this great, great story. Again, it's going to change the way you daven, as you'll see in a moment. 2 weeks ago, I had the great zchus to be in Boca Raton in Florida for Shabbos. It's a wonderful, wonderful rabbi there. His name is Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg. He's been there for 10 years, and they had a 10-year celebration, Hakaras HaTov, to the rabbi, and it was just beautiful. Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos, Sunday, it was just great. And there were other speakers besides myself, and it was a very lovely Shabbos. Rabbi Goldberg has an assistant rabbi. His name is Rabbi Moskowitz. And wherever I go these days, people are always telling me stories, and I love it because you never know. 98 out of 100 stories I can't use, but once you hear that great story, boy, that's really worth listening to everybody. So he told me a fabulous story. He told me he has a sister-in-law who's got a distant cousin in Israel, and the guy was in the Israeli army, IDF, right? Israeli Defense Force. Now, many of you know that some of the guys, when they finish the army, they go traveling. I don't know why they have this mishigas, but they all go to Thailand, or they go to Asia, they go to India. Even by the tsunami, there were so many Israelis that were, got caught up in it because they travel there after they go to the army. Anyhow, this guy was in India. He had gone to a Mamlachti Dati school, which is a semi-religious school in Israel. Not a yeshiva, but it was some Jewish education, religious education. But the longer he stayed in India, the less religious he became, until he threw it all away. One night he's in a bar with a group of goyim in Mumbai, in India. It's about 7 o'clock at night, and he's drinking with his friends, and all of a sudden he hears the sound of a shofar outside the bar. Now, he knew what the sound of a shofar is like. Who is blowing shofar, at night in Mumbai? And it's a very piercing sound, but you're frightened as it is on Rosh Hashanah, but especially at night when you're not expecting it. He runs outside to see who it is. He can't see who the guy is. He doesn't know where he is. Nobody's blowing shofar. It stopped already. But then down the block he sees that the guy's blowing shofar again. He didn't want to chase him. But he's trying to see, who is this guy? And then the guy walks along and then he blows a third time. Well, he couldn't understand it. He went straight home. He didn't even go back into the bar. He went straight home to his house, to his apartment. He takes out his calendar and he takes a look and he sees that it was Yom Kippur. And this Lubavitcher guy who was blowing shofar, because in Mumbai they have a Chabad house, this guy was blowing shofar to tell all the Jews in Mumbai that the fast was over, and that they could work or eat or whatever. Well, when he realized that he had fallen so far that he had not even known that it was Yom Kippur, he literally sat down on his bed and he started crying. How could that happen so fast that I lost every connection? I didn't even know it was Yom Kippur. The next morning, he got on a plane to Israel. He left, even without telling goodbye to his friends. He left and he enrolled himself into a yeshiva. He was in that yeshiva for 10 years. During that time, he got married, and he had a family, and he learned still in the yeshiva after he got married. Today, he's a religious boy with a family. And Rabbi Moskowitz is distantly related to him. And he told me when he heard this story, he thought of something which is so brilliant, and you got to write it down. But first, I want to tell you how he introduced it, this thought. He said, that Lubavitcher fellow will never, ever know how he influenced this person. He just went and blew shofar. Did he know that there's a guy sitting in the bar who's going to feel bad that he didn't know that it was Yom Kippur? And this guy is never going to know who that Lubavitcher was. But he said, when we daven Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we say this. The most moving tefillah is Unasana Tokef. And we say like this. That Hashem remembers everything that was forgotten. Hashem remembers. V'tziftach es-sefer ha-zichronos. Hashem opens up the book of memories. Ume'elav yikarei. It reads by itself. It's like a self-rolling video. Me'elav yikarei. It happens by itself. V'choisem yad kol adam boy. A person sees a video of their whole life, everything that they did. Hashem and you watch it together, and then you sign off on it. V'choisem yad kol adam boy. Every person signs because they see that's exactly what they did, and the person is judged on everything that they did. So Rabbi Moskowitz said that he believes that this expression v'choisem yad kol adam boy doesn't go only on the person himself. He said, when that fellow, that soldier, when he's looking at his book, and Hashem's going to see who's the one who influenced him, that guy who blew shofar, he signed that book. Every person who had influence on somebody else, they signed that other person's book. And when you are a mashpia and you inspire somebody, you're signing their book. And when somebody inspires you, they sign your book. And that's the final thing to give. To give to each other, especially in difficult times, inspiration and the love for Yiddishkeit, and the love for Torah, and the love to remain close to Hashem, and the power to remain strong even in difficult times. And if you give that to somebody else, you're signing that book. That's v'choisem kol yad kol adam boy. Hashem should bench every single one of you. That you should come to Purim committed that you're going to become giving people, committed that you're going to daven, and know that it's a holy day. It's not only a happy day, it's a day of great frivolity, no question about it. It's happiness, but it's also serious. That's when Esther was answered, and that's what we want Yom Kippurim, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch tells us. Kol ha-poishet yad, anybody who extends their hand, you give him. You give to everybody. And that's why the Hasidic Sfarim say, you open up your hand to Hashem, you open up your heart to Hashem, Hashem will give you what you want. Hashem should bless you, that you should get everything that you want, L'Tov. It should be a Freilich Purim, and we should be able to all sing and dance together with Mashiach in the next coming year, in the month of Geula and Nisan. I thank you very much for inviting me, and I thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, everyone.